You stare at the screen. The Figma canvas is completely blank. Or maybe you just generated another landing page using an AI tool.
Right. And it has that same generic purple gradient.
You know the exact look I am talking about. It looks perfectly competent, but it feels, well, entirely soulless. It lacks any real perspective.
Yeah, it's totally flat.
Beat. Welcome to the Deep Dive. I am really glad you're joining us today. We are unpacking something that completely changes how we think about creativity and systems.
We really are looking at a fundamental shift today. Our mission is decoding a methodology called Claude Code Design.
Mm-hmm.
We're exploring how you take abstract design rules, the things we normally just call taste, and turn them into a repeatable plain text system.
Which sounds impossible at first.
It does, but the promise here is massive, because once you build this underlying architecture, you never have to start from zero again.
That concept of codifying taste is exactly what hooked me. So let's start by looking at the baseline problem we are all facing. Everyone recognizes current AI design.
Oh, absolutely.
It defaults to a highly specific, totally forgettable aesthetic.
It is the digital equivalent of elevator music. You ask an AI to make a modern website, and it immediately outputs a massive, centered hero section.
Always.
Below that, you inevitably get 3 perfectly spaced feature cards. The buttons are always softly rounded.
Right.
And there's usually a subtle drop shadow on everything. It's clean, sure, but it has absolutely no point of view.
It is technically proficient, but artistically vacant. And the root cause isn't a lack of computing power. The source material points directly to vague prompting.
Yeah, the classic 5-word prompt.
We sit down and type, make a modern fintech site, and that is simply not enough structural information.
You really can't expect a machine to invent your brand's soul from a 5-word prompt. It's just going to guess.
I still wrestle with prompt drift myself. I'll sit there late at night tweaking an AI prompt for hours.
Oh, man. We've all been there.
I'll adjust the wording, ask it to make things sleeker or more dynamic. My eyes will literally start to hurt from staring at the variations.
Yeah.
And after all that manual labor, the final result still looks artificially generated.
That frustration is universal right now. The fix requires a completely different approach. We have to translate our visual preferences into strict, measurable rules.
Right.
We need to dictate the exact typography scales. We need to define the spacing tokens. We really need to establish strict boundaries for layout and colors.
It reminds me of working with a master chef. If you walk into a Michelin-starred kitchen and just tell the chef, cook me something good.
They're going to play it safe.
Exactly. They will probably fall back on a standard safe dish. They don't know your palate. But if you hand them your grandmother's specific family recipe, complete with exact ratios for spices and precise resting times, you are guiding their technical expertise.
That chef analogy perfectly captures the dynamic. You aren't just handing them the ingredients, you are defining the technique.
Mm-hmm.
The source material contrasts this beautifully. The weak prompt just asks for a modern website, but the better prompt acts like that detailed recipe.
It demands a, quote, clean fintech landing page with sharp pricing cards, dark navy accents, and strict sans serif typography. That specific language bridges the gap.
You're stripping away the AI's ability to guess. You dictate that headlines must be oversized. You force the layout to maintain massive open sections.
You restrict the color palette to 3 specific hex codes.
Right. It forces the output out of that generic purple gradient territory.
Which brings up an interesting philosophical point about the tools we use. Beat. So is it that the AI lacks the capability to design well, or do we just lack the vocabulary to instruct it?
It is entirely about our instructions. The AI has the capability, it just needs us to define the boundaries of taste.
Right, we just need to translate visual taste into specific text rules.
Exactly.
So if the fix is giving the AI a highly specific technical recipe, how do we actually write that document? That leads us straight into the mechanics of text-based design.
2-sec silence. This is where the methodology gets incredibly practical. We are looking at a real-world repository called Awesome Designer AI.
Yeah.
It's a GitHub tool that basically acts as a library of plain text design systems.
That's the part that feels so counterintuitive to me. High-end, nuanced visual taste things that usually require a senior art director to understand can actually live inside a simple Markdown text file.
Yeah, we're talking about a specific file, usually named design.md. This mundane little text document becomes Claude's ultimate design guide.
Wow.
It means your brand's visual identity is no longer locked inside proprietary software. It isn't trapped in a messy Canva template or, A complex Figma file.
It lives as raw code. I was reading through the Awesome Designer AI examples in the source, and it is fascinating how they break down major brands. Stripe is a great example to unpack here.
Oh, Stripe is perfect.
Stripe is widely considered the gold standard for clean sauce design.
Stripe's design language is entirely focused on projecting trust and technical competence. Their plain text system doesn't just say, look trustworthy. It defines specific, measurable rules.
It dictates crisp pricing layouts.
Right. It enforces rigid rules around using massive amounts of white space to let the content breathe.
Then you look at Spotify's rules, which are fundamentally opposed to Stripe's. Spotify's text file dictates deep, rich, dark themes.
Completely different vibe.
It forces the AI to use bold, vibrant, neon accents that pop against that dark background. The rules actively encourage heavy visual contrast.
You also have SpaceX in that repository. Their brand is about scale and drama. So their text rules demand cinematic layouts. The Markdown dictates sweeping product sections that stretch across the entire viewport.
And Apple's system is predictably minimal. The text file aggressively enforces a product-first hierarchy. The typography rules are incredibly rigid, stripping away anything that distracts from the core device being showcased.
And Claude reads this design.md file, internalizes these strict constraints, and then actually builds functional assets.
It's wild.
It writes the code for fully responsive pricing pages. It generates perfectly formatted HTML slide decks. It builds interactive website sections that perfectly match the codified brand.
I do have to push back a little bit on the mechanics here, though. I am slightly skeptical that a plain text document can truly capture an abstract vibe. Take SpaceX's cinematic feel.
Okay, yeah.
How does Claude know what cinematic actually means just from reading text without any visual aids?
Claude already has broad training on those concepts. The text just sets the strict boundaries and constraints for it to apply that training.
Got it. Text defines boundaries, and Claude fills in the creative execution.
That is the perfect way to summarize it.
Knowing these pre-made templates exist in a GitHub repository is fantastic. But relying on someone else's templates isn't enough if you want to build a unique brand. You have to build a custom system for your specific workflow.
Building your own system is where the real leverage is. The source outlines a very precise 5-step framework to codify your own work. Step 1 is choosing the format.
Right.
You have to be strategic here. You must pick the task with the highest return.
You shouldn't pick the most exciting task or the one you enjoy doing the most. You pick the bottleneck.
Exactly. If you're running a YouTube channel, your biggest bottleneck might be creating HTML slide decks for your educational videos. So you codify that.
Yeah.
If you run a creative agency doing client work, your highest return task is probably generating pristine client proposals.
You build the system around the task you repeat constantly. Once the format is chosen, step 2 is adding your tools and integrations.
Crucial step.
Claude shouldn't be forced to guess what your brand looks like. You have to feed it context from your actual business operations.
You plug it into your existing ecosystem.
Yeah.
You connect it to your GitHub repositories. You link it to your Gmail to understand your communication style. You feed it massive amounts of meeting transcripts.
Whoa, imagine generating hundreds of perfectly branded slide decks just from meeting transcripts. You finish a 1-hour Zoom call, and the system automatically outputs the client presentation.
That is the reality of this workflow. But to get that level of accuracy, the source highlights a critical tool for this step called Firecrawl.
Let's define that quickly for the audience. Firecrawl is a tool that copies website data into text for AI.
It acts as a bridge. It crawls your existing live website. It pulls down your exact logo files. It maps out your entire DOM structure.
Wow.
Yeah, it extracts your precise brand colors and typography scales. It basically turns your live website into data Claude can read.
Which leads us directly into step 3, providing references. Tools like Firecrawl give the AI factual information, but references give the AI taste.
Right, because information isn't enough to make something beautiful. You have to show Claude what your version of excellent looks like.
How do you practically do that within a text-based workflow? The source mentions using Midjourney.
Yeah, you can generate conceptual images in Midjourney that capture your desired aesthetic. You feed those images into Claude. Claude's vision model analyzes the flat image. It maps out the spatial relationships, extracts the implicit color hierarchy, and translates those visual cues into structural code rules.
You can also use your own historical assets. You feed it your best-performing Canva templates or past agency designs. You are giving it a visual target to aim for before it writes a single line of code.
Which brings us to step 4, generating the first version. The crucial mindset shift here is that you are only aiming for an 80% draft.
Because expecting perfection on the first output will just lead to frustration.
Exactly. The goal of step 4 is purely structural. You want the layout to be logically sound. You want the typography to match your brand rules. You want the primary colors placed correctly.
You're just trying to escape the terror of the blank page. A flawed 80% draft gives you something tangible to react to.
Reacting to a draft is always faster than creating from scratch. That's why step 5 is so important. Step 5 is refine and save as a skill. This step is where the actual magic of codification happens.
The feedback loop. But you can't use traditional client feedback here. You can't just tell Claude, make it pop or make it feel more dynamic.
No, vague feedback breaks the system completely. Your feedback must be hyper-specific. You have to speak in structural rules. Instead of saying, it looks too busy, you tell Claude, limit the layout to 3 hex codes.
Instead of saying make it smoother, you command it to use slower motion on the CSS transitions.
You're literally tweaking the machine's parameters. Reduce padding by 20 pixels. Increase the contrast ratio on the subheaders.
Like stacking Lego blocks of data.
Yes. And once you dial in those parameters and the output looks perfect, you save that entire prompt chain as a reusable workflow. It becomes a permanent skill in your library.
Beat. I am curious about step 2 again, though. Why is Firecrawl necessary if you can just attach a screenshot of a website?
Well, screenshots are totally flat. Firecrawl pulls the exact text codes, typography, and HTML structure.
Firecrawl pulls exact code and colors, not just a flat image.
Exactly. That underlying data makes the whole system robust.
Sponsor.
All right, let's zoom out now. We've mapped out this exact step-by-step framework for codifying taste. What does this mean for the industry at large?
We are witnessing a fundamental paradigm shift. The source material refers to this as the code-first design future.
Code-first design. That phrase carries a lot of weight.
It changes the entire objective of creative work. Under this model, you aren't actually making a design. You are building the machine that makes the design.
Right. You spend your energy defining the rules once, and then you let Claude execute the layout generation over and over again at near zero marginal cost.
Let's break down the impact on different professions. For independent creators and startup founders, this shift is incredibly empowering.
Historically, custom design has always been a massive bottleneck. It's expensive, it's slow, and it requires specialized talent.
With a codified system, founders can launch new products infinitely faster. They maintain impossibly clean, consistent visuals across all their platforms.
And they save thousands of dollars on routine, one-off design tasks.
What about developers? This seems like a massive structural change for engineering teams.
Developers no longer need to spend years mastering the intricacies of Figma to build beautiful products. But they do have to acquire a new hybrid skill. The source describes it as coding plus taste.
Coding plus taste. They need to understand the underlying principles of visual hierarchy.
They have to learn how to articulate design critique technically. A developer can't just look at a generated layout and say, make it look better.
Right.
They need the vocabulary to say, use stronger typographic hierarchy here, or increase the negative space around the primary call to action.
They act as the art director, guiding the creative direction, while Claude acts as the production designer, writing the actual code. And what is the impact on larger established teams?
This might be the most practical application of all. Think about traditional corporate brand guidelines. Usually, a company spends $50,000 on a rebrand.
And they get a beautifully designed PDF that sits completely dead on a shared hard drive.
Exactly. Nobody ever actually follows the PDF rules when they are rushing to finish a sales deck on a Friday afternoon.
That is the reality of corporate design. But Claude Code takes those dead PDF guidelines and turns them into living, usable engines.
You transform a static reference document into an active system that automatically generates your daily deliverables.
It builds your internal dashboards, your client proposals, your quarterly reports.
It enforces strict brand consistency automatically, without requiring a senior designer to review every single slide.
But I do have to push back on behalf of professional designers here. If the machine handles all the execution and the guidelines are enforced automatically, does human taste actually matter anymore?
Yes, the creative work is still there. You still need judgment and taste, but now taste becomes a system.
So where does Figma fit into a world where Claude does all the heavy lifting?
Figma is simply the final polish step. It is definitely not the starting line anymore.
Exactly. Use Claude for the fast draft, Figma for the pixel-perfect finish.
That hybrid approach is how the best teams will operate moving forward.
2-sec silence. This has been a thoroughly fascinating shift in perspective. The core truth we are uncovering is that good design doesn't have to be this ethereal, abstract concept trapped inside a creative director's head.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't have to be stuck in a massive, disorganized Figma file full of disconnected layers.
It is so liberating when you realize those visual rules can be extracted.
They can be codified.
But
They can be written down in plain text. They can be turned into a highly repeatable system that scales your specific visual identity. A landing page isn't just a page anymore. It is a localized output of a much larger system.
that systemic thinking is the future. It leaves me with one final, slightly provocative thought to consider.
Let's hear it.
If our current modern visual taste can be perfectly codified into Markdown and perfectly replicated by Claude at scale, what happens to the value of current design trends? Will the most valuable design skill of tomorrow simply be having a wildly unique, undefinable perspective that an AI hasn't been trained on yet?
That is a profound question to end on. It really challenges us to find the human element in our work. I encourage you to look at the very next document or presentation you create this week. Ask yourself, am I just doing a one-off chore, or can I turn this into a system? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.